This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the vehicle owner's manual for important feature limitations and information.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Ducks Confidential podcast. And for those joining in the video capacity, live and in living color, for myself, James Crepia, and Bill Oram. Bill, kind enough to join me here on this Monday to start off the holiday week that is, and the week plus of preparation for Oregon and Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. And that is where we will spend, as you might imagine, the entirety of this edition of the podcast. Yes, being that, yes, it is formally the matchup that we all expected, probably in the Big Ten championship game, first and foremost, and then a theoretical potential third matchup, although this will be the second one in the postseason. And I understand why a lot of people feel this way. Probably a little bit too early in the playoff, because, calling it what it is, these are probably the two most talented teams in the country. Whether or not you want to then say they're the two best teams in the country, I think Georgia and Texas may have a word or two about that. But it is probably a unjust matchup for both teams insofar as, because we're not going down the rabbit hole of the seeding and every which other thing part of the playoff. This is all part of it. It is what it is. You're going to have to beat good teams to get there. And yes, they are just going to be pitted in a quarterfinal in the Rose Bowl that far and away is the quarterfinal matchup that is drawing all the attention. So now that it's formally the matchup that we all expected, albeit probably a little early for the postseason in this capacity, a little late by way of what could have been in a Big Ten championship game. Your thoughts, Bill Oram, on the matchup that is the rematch from October 12th and the classic that was, with 7 lead changes and down to the last second and 12-men penalties and sliding quarterbacks and all the rest?
My first thought is that it just is kind of marvelous, for lack of a better term, that this season, at least for Oregon, has been defined by Ohio State. And Ohio State has been on the horizon for Oregon really ever since the Ducks joined the Big Ten. Since that moment back in August of 2023, when we found out this was happening, it kind of all became about, wow, this is now, they're going to be measuring themselves against, the powers of the Big Ten, Michigan, Ohio State. But especially in this first year, Ohio State going into the year, we knew was going to be one of the biggest games in the history of Autzen Stadium, a potential top 3 matchup that delivered. And then after week 6, we basically spent week 6 through 12 thinking, hey, the rematch is going to come in Indianapolis, like you alluded to at the top. And that ended up not happening. But then here it is now in the Rose Bowl. It seems like basically whenever you looked up this year, if you were checking in on Oregon football and you looked up, it's like, boom, there's Ohio State coming down the highway. So we have another one of these now. The first game, as you said, was one of the all-time greats. And as close as it was and as nip and tuck as it was with the lead changes, and obviously, if Will Howard slides 1 second earlier, I really felt like Oregon had control of that game. Like, I thought that was a more decisive victory from the Ducks in terms of controlling the tempo, defensively containing all the weapons that Ohio State has. I really felt like that was a game that Oregon should have won by more with the way they played on that particular day. So I look at this matchup as sort of a chance to validate that win. Obviously you don't have the great Autzen Stadium crowd at your back at the Rose Bowl, but I think Oregon fans are going to turn up. I think that, if in my mind, this is the matchup that Oregon should have wanted coming out of coming into this playoff. You are the number 1 team in the country. You have, certainly build yourself as the best team in the country at this point. This is your chance to go prove it. And like, yes, you said the seeding makes this very, very difficult, but this is a matchup that sort of, shows, yes, we are legitimate. We are as legitimate as we looked on October 12th.
I agree with you on a lot of that. I think that looking back at the October 12th matchup that was, and certainly not to take anything away from what Ohio State accomplished in that game, because there was certainly some good individual play in that game. But really, in virtually every facet, Oregon outplayed Ohio State. Gabriel outplayed Howard. Not by a massive margin. Howard played well, but he outplayed him. Yes, Ohio State's receivers did okay, and Smith did have a touchdown. But in terms of preventing the top from being blown off, Oregon did that. Ohio State did not. Not even close. I mean, Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart both blew the top off on Denzel Burke and basically ran through him multiple times.
Wasn't there I'm scratching my memory now too, but wasn't there a Trayshawn Holden deep ball as well? Or am I confused now with a different game?
Yeah, so like they hit on all cylinders there, and if you take away one play, no, every play matters. But one run from Henderson was a 53-yarder. When you look at the other 32, they did a pretty good job limiting the impact of the Ohio State run game as well. And it was the latest instance twice by Oregon. If you go back since 2017, Ohio State's last 12 losses, if they lose the turnover margin and the rushing battle in the same game, 7 of those 12 losses, that's a common thread. 2 of them were by Oregon. And then in the others, 4 of them, they lost, I believe it was the rushing battle. And the last one, they lost the turnover battle. So the bottom line is, what held true, and Dan talked about it heading into that game and after that game, and I'm sure it'll come up again in this one, it's not exactly a hard formula to crack. This is the prototypical Big Ten philosophy, but it applies to an extreme against this team and this program. If you outrush Ohio State, that's like pillar one to accomplishing a win against them. That's the first thing. And as I say, outside of a 53-yarder, which they still outran them on the day, but outside of that, they really outran Ohio State in that game. And then, yes, the turnover margin where there was 1, yeah, it mattered in a big way. So those are the things that stand out from that game in terms of how they applied it, how they ultimately outplayed them, and obviously outcoached them in every way imaginable. And that, again, Ohio State's offense still managed to put up a whole bunch of yards. But Oregon put up more yards and scored more points against Ohio State than anybody the past 2 seasons since the 2022 playoffs, and Georgia. So, and then you look at who they've played since, and even with the loss to Michigan, Michigan ran more. Obviously, they can't throw the football. So the commonalities of, and the things that could still apply to this matchup, one thing that will absolutely stand, just in terms of philosophically speaking, is, whoever wins the rushing battle is going to have a major, major and decisive upper hand in the game. That's just in this particular matchup with this particular opponent. Not everybody's that way. This team is that way. Turnover margins always, you can say that about any opponent in the country, any game, any mismatch, anything. So that's obvious. When you put them together, yes, it is the recipe to beat this Ohio State program even before Ryan Day, quite frankly. But what could apply, what does apply and what doesn't? The other aspect is, Jordan Burch didn't play in that game.
You took my talking point. Come on, man. You got more talking points than I do.
I'm setting you up and you knock them down. But Jordan Burch didn't play in that game. And Ohio State, their offensive line wasn't as mangled entering that game as it is today. One of those injuries happened in that game. But they are a different offensive line. And Oregon is at the moment, as we know it today, they're the healthiest they've been all season from the most critical of positions. Not to say there aren't still guys who are out, et cetera. Obviously, Bedford's basically missed the entire season. Casper went down, certain things. But ultimately, they're basically the healthiest they've been all season on the 2 deep. And that was not the case on October 12th, and they still managed to win that game without certainly their best edge rusher, and that's not taking anything away from Mateo, who's also turned it up since. But if you've got the top 2 drafted players on this team in April will be Birch and Derek Harmon. Harmon had an impact in that game. Birch didn't play.
Yep. That's the point I wanted to make here, was that, what might have been sort of a neutral battle along the line in that game where, Ohio State, had success on the ground. As you said, Oregon outrushed them, but feels like a decisive Oregon advantage in this game now, given the adjustments that Ohio State has had to make on the fly, the fact that they're still figuring things out even at this point, whereas Oregon has had a chance to they got Jordan Birch back in there. He played some games, missed another game, then was still out there. This defensive line is as intimidating of a unit as Oregon has, and that's an understatement. When you look at what Mateo Uiagalelei, Jordan Birch, Derek Harmon, and Jamari Caldwell can all do, right? Those are the key pieces there. They have all made game-defining plays this season. Each and every one of those guys. And so to have all of them presumably healthy and ready to go against Ohio State is maybe the biggest advantage that Oregon has anywhere on the field. Aside from Dylan Gabriel, who I think is probably their biggest difference maker just in this entire playoff field. But that is where I think you really need to watch this Oregon team, and I think where you're going to see them make a difference, getting off the field on third down in a way that maybe they weren't as easily able to do in the first one. So I think that's a big one. I also wanted to finish off a point that you were making there. There's been a question about, is it better to have had the month of rest or to have had a game to sort of build up into the playoff, right? Like Ohio State has completely changed its narrative over the last week, where people were like, oh, is Ohio State psychologically there after what happened against Michigan? Is this team totally in disarray? Well, they hosted Tennessee and beat the snot out of them. And so, okay, now they're back to being the best team in the country. Like, it's amazing how easily that happens and how quickly that happens. Oregon hasn't had that, that recent reminder of how good they are, even though their last game was a, really high quality win on a neutral site against what was then the number 3 team in the country. But the argument for, especially for this Oregon team, to be better off with this break, in addition to, no kidding, you don't want to risk injury, you don't want to wear yourself out and all the accumulation that comes with these really high level games. But to be able to get a guy like Jordan Birch fully healthy, we presume, right? We're not in the trainer's room, but a month of like focused rehab and physical training is physical therapy is very different from trying to adjust for a game in a week and then another week. The other injury that you were worried about in mid-November, Tez Johnson. We did not know when he got hurt in Ann Arbor. I remember the question being, will he be back for the Big Ten championship game? Will he be back for the playoff? So to give that guy, who obviously came back and played against Washington and played in the Big Ten championship game and was spectacular in the Big Ten championship game, but for him to now have another month to get additionally healthy, and everybody else who has the nicks and bruises and things that we don't even know about, the injuries that you have not been complaining about, James, that I know that you've accumulated over the course of this grueling season, to give those almost a full month of, I think it's 25 days between games. That is a huge asset, especially when you're talking about how much football potentially awaits this team. And that's one thing, Dan Lanning, there was a morning press conference today with Ryan Day and Dan Lanning, and you and I were both listening in on that. And one thing, Dan Lanning did talk about was how you physically and mentally condition a team for what could become for some teams a 17-week season. For Oregon, it could be 16. Those 3 weeks off, quote unquote off, is just a huge advantage. And I think that it is an even bigger advantage for Oregon when you consider that the other 3 teams, at least 2 of the other 3 teams that have that advantage, I don't think anybody really expects to be there at the end, right? Arizona State, feisty, interesting. Maybe could beat Texas, but I don't think anybody's looking at Arizona State as a threat to beat Oregon. They could, maybe. I don't know. I don't think so. Boise State, I don't think anybody thinks they're going to come out of that side of the bracket. And Georgia doesn't have their starting quarterback. So of the teams that got the advantage of the bye, I think Oregon is best positioned to really take advantage of that time off.
Oh, I agree there. No, for sure. Because the health situation is such for them to where, as you laid out, guys who were already on the mend, guys who were already in solid positions but could be in better positions. Tez particularly, look, for as great as he played in the Big Ten Championship game, and he did, he was not trucking through anybody for extra yards. There were plenty of times, and he's done it at other points in the season, but it stands out more after the injury in Ann Arbor because, he's sliding down. Either getting out of bounds or sliding down and getting down quickly, which he's done before. But you go, all right, hey, maybe a guy who may have dinged up his shoulder a little bit is saving himself, some grief along the way. And who would fault him? So the point is you give him that much more time. Not to say he's suddenly going to be, taking on every safety in his way. But point is you buy guys time. Jordan Burch was really effective in the Washington game along with Mateo with the 10 sacks in that game. And he had 2.5. Mateo had 2. And, he did okay in the Big Ten Championship game. But you're talking about a guy who was still coming off the ankle injury against Maryland. All right, well, now it's, again, buying more time. Marcus Harper doesn't start in the Big Ten Championship game, rotates in. All right, well, now that you're buying him that much more time to be prepared to potentially return to the starting lineup, and the line did fine against Penn State, did quite well, actually. But I don't think you're going to see as much rotation as you saw in the Big Ten Championship game. You saw more rotation of the personnel on the offensive line. That was the most that you saw from it since the Boise State game. And that was in disarray. This was just because, we were already ready to take 2 guys, and the starter's back, so let's make it 3. And you just swung it all around. It really was 4 when you factor that Strother was who necessarily could come out if they're going right side, left side, whatever the case was. So point being, you're buying guys more time who are already there or working their way back into it. To say nothing of, like you say, some of the minor ones that we don't know as much about. Whereas, not to go through every single injury on every single one of these teams, but point is Carson Beck's out. That ain't changing. So, it may allow Georgia to put Stockton in a better position and work with him for some time, but they're not getting their starter back. That's just not happening. So whether or not it, assists their game planning and whatnot, that's perhaps. But ultimately, I'm with you. Like, I think that the advantageous aspect of the bye probably applies most to Oregon, followed by Georgia. And then, if you want to say, taking a little bit of wear and tear and allowing Ashton Genty some time, just because of the workload that he faces for Boise State, and that obviously if they're going to win, he's going to have a big day. Those sorts of aspects. Yeah. But otherwise, I'm with you. Like, and I'm not faulting the seeding process. I understand the how and why and how we got there, and et cetera, et cetera. But bottom line, I'm with you. Like, I don't think very many people are picking Boise State or Arizona State to pull off upsets, regardless of the seed lines or any which other thing in this. So for this matchup specifically, that buy side, yes, it could certainly work in Oregon's favor in a positive way. Having said that, I also agree with you that the complete flipping of the script on all things Ohio State after one of the most embarrassing performances they'd had, an inexplicable performance, quite frankly. Michigan's not good.
I mean, when you say
really
inexplicable,
good defensive front. They're a really good defensive front with one of the best defensive minds in college football who completely and utterly undressed Chip Kelly and Ryan Day in that game. Wink Martin, like anybody, frankly, like Tennessee, now Oregon, and if Ohio State's anybody playing them should be getting Wink Martindale and anyone on that staff on retainer. Just for as a consultant for 5 minutes. Yeah. Because what he did to them, yes, he had the players, but guess what? Oregon's got some defensive players. When you have that kind of talent to completely and utterly destroy one of the best offenses in the country and you go, oh yeah, you got that receiver
and one
there.
of the best offensive play callers in the history of the sport. I mean, I'm not saying that it has this, it's as impactful in 2024 as it was in 2010, but like one of the most innovative play callers in the history of the sport.
In that era, for sure. I don't know. Would we ever say that about any offensive play caller who has a absolute prodigy wide receiver one and refuses to throw at him when the other team doesn't just have their top cornerback out, their number 2 cornerback out.
Yeah.
And you still don't throw to him.
Yeah.
I think any other offensive mind who didn't do something 15 years ago that was innovative would be absolutely roasted mercilessly. I don't give a free pass to anybody because of what they did 15 years ago.
Sure.
When you do something that egregious. That is so was so ridiculous.
It is unbelievable that the same Michigan team that we watched all year, that was basically the free bingo square in the Big Ten for any team that had a pulse, was able to go in and, like you said, completely undress that Ohio State team, because it was, you know, and so when you say it was inexplicable, here's a point I made in the column today. In any other system this sport has ever had, Ohio State's season would be over. They would not be in a 4-team playoff.
Absolutely.
And obviously, you know, in the BCS,
and half the team would have opted out of
they'd be in the Citrus Bowl. Yeah,
and
exactly.
Half the team would have opted out.
But like
half the team opted out of the Rose Bowl when they played Utah a couple of years ago.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, you know, Ohio State should be thanking its lucky stars that it is having this season in this system. And I know Oregon fans are lamenting the system because, hey, in any other system, Oregon would be either in the championship game or would be automatically in the semifinal. But I will say that the level of unease that I think Oregon fans have about the fact that it's Ohio State in the quarterfinal does speak to the fact that this system kind of worked. Like, you're getting a championship level game. You're getting championship level games all the way through January, which I think is kind of the point. I just think that when you're the number one team that has been clear and away the number one team, you are disadvantaged by the system. But for the sport in general, and for the networks, obviously, but for viewers, it's going to be a great January football. Like, the system is delivering. I know that the first round games were disappointing, but in terms of what the first round games ended up setting up, I think it's terrific.
Yeah, I don't overreact to 1 year sample and all that. And again, like, you had to incentivize playing and winning conference championship games.
Yep.
So the bye was the advent to do that. All right, it was done when there were 5 power conferences that were more equal than, even with the Pac-12 being weaker comparatively speaking. Then it became 4 with a 2-2 kind of split. All right, if they eventually move to 14, then we all know it'll be the top 2 conference championships get the byes, and it'll, shocker, will end up being the Big Ten and the SEC more years than not. So whatever. I don't overreact to. They're going
to iron out the kinks of this, and it's going to be fine. Like, it's going to be fine, and there will be years where you're going to see a 12 upset of 5. It'll happen. It'll be. I mean, it's not. It'll
be really hard.
But I mean, the point I think that is important here is that there will be it's not going to be blowout and chalk every year in that first round.
No, that I agree.
That's the fun of it. And I'm a little disappointed that in the first year of it we didn't get a little more spice just to help sell the product. But I did. I thought that those home environments looked great. I thought those games looked fun. I'm disappointed in a sense that the team we cover didn't participate in one, because I think that is something that was new and novel and fun to participate in. That said, I don't think that a game in Eugene on December 20th would have been a particularly enjoyable experience in an open air press box for those of us who need to have our fingers exposed at all times.
Ironically, the weather ended up being better than it would have probably ordinarily been. Right. But be that as it may, at the end, again, there's a million aspects to it. If they expand it to the quarterfinal round, what happens to the bowls? Well, the bowls are presently part of the system, so it's not happening in 25. So then what happens after that? But these entities still have way too much power and influence in the whole ecosystem. So if you were to somehow, even in an expanded situation, what do you do with the New Year's Six? They're not giving up. They're not relinquishing their piece of the action,
their existence.
So, you got to square that circle. And I understand if you were to draw up a system, you would not get to this. But this is the system that we have because there is no one uniform entity controlling everything. There are conferences who conspire together to work togetger to create such a system, and this is why we get this system by committee. But be that literally and figuratively.
Who was it that was, I mean, obviously this is not uncommon, but they made the rounds again the other day. Somebody arguing that there needs to be a president of college football or a CEO of college football. That was Franklin
because of the backup quarterback. And the transfer window being open at the same time as the playoff and what have you. And again, that's a point that's been talked about before.
Yeah.
There's a lot of this where, all right, clearly Penn State and Oregon, for that matter, are teams where if you're in the portal, you're not going to practice and play for them in the playoff. Others, Arizona State specifically, but not the only one, SMU was one, who said, hey, if you go in, you can still practice and play as long as you're not missing things. How much of this is coach's discretion? How much of this is institutional general counsel's office decision-making because of literally legal grounds that get real tricky real fast? And especially, look, a lot of this stuff's going to get ironed out by the time they get to employment and other federal cases that fans don't care about necessarily until it just happens. So we'll worry about it getting there. But bottom line, yes, moving parts of it all. But the calls for a commissioner of college football have been had for a good decade. Nick Saban was usually leading the charge on that. And I believe he still is. And many people have suggested now that he's not coaching that he should be the commissioner, except I would love to see the day that Greg Sankey, Tony Petitti, and company just say, yes, please take my power from me. I will hand it all over. Because out of the goodness of my heart, all the agency and control and autonomy that I have, I will forego to this third-party entity or individual who I just entrust more with all things for my league.
Than
in which
myself.
case, what is my role exactly?
So the reason I asked, even though that was all very educational, was I wanted to know if you wanted the job. Like if we could get you to be the prez. The CFP or the college football president.
I don't know if they can afford me, Bill. Because most of these things in the playoff and whatnot, the playoff committee, I think most of them I don't think that. Yeah, I literally don't think they're barely compensated, other than the hotel and reimbursement for travel. Literally, I think those are literally volunteer jobs. Other than Richard Clark, who used to be Bill Hancock, whatever. Other than the executive director,
there better be some Costco croissants in that room at least. That would be at minimum. I'm sure they've stepped it up a little bit more than that. They're usually at the one of the Hyatt. I want to say Hyatt Regency, one of them in Dallas. But anyway, all on aside. The last thing on this edition of the podcast being, as we'll get into the stakes of this one, which, as we've laid out, are fairly obvious. Winner goes on to the Cotton Bowl to play the winner of Arizona State and Texas, which, of course, could be a meeting with Texas in Dallas, theoretically speaking. Loser goes home and fires up the 2025 depth charts. And when these are two teams, you have, on one hand, one team who, again, is 3 weeks removed from being embarrassed, but is now a juggernaut again. But the entire last year has been spent proclaiming it is national title or bust, which is why, after being embarrassed 3 weeks ago, many in that fan base expressed that even with a national championship, it would be hollow because of the loss to Michigan yet again. So that's one mindset and frame of reference and whatnot. So a loss and 97 won the fan in Columbus is going to be real interesting on January 2nd with a loss. I'll say that. Whereas on the other side, you have the only undefeated 13-0, first year in the league, team out west, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they were number one, and they're the league champion. And we'll see between portal and everything else in terms of where Oregon ends up with recruiting classes and every which other thing. And then if they were to turn around and lose, is that not also a failure? So I've already written that it's national championship or bust for the Ducks because you are having one of those seasons and you've got to take advantage of them when they're there. And I also think particularly this year, like if you look around college football, there is no juggernaut unless it's Oregon. Like unless it's Oregon, there is no Georgia level dynasty team out there. So, but I think it'd be a much bigger disaster for Oregon to lose this game than for Ohio State to lose, because the worst thing has already happened to Ohio State. Like if Ohio State loses, and you're more familiar with that fan base and that, obviously those environs than I am, but they're already calling for the coach's head. They already want to burn it all down
and have a successor picked out.
This would just be validation of those feelings. At Oregon, this is their first appearance in the playoff. This is your first time under Dan Lanning getting to the playoff on this sort of gradual but rapid build, from 3 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, getting absolutely, eviscerated by Georgia. Like, this is your moment, and your first meaningful postseason game in those 3 years is a faceplant. I think that it would be I think there would be greater carnage in Columbus from a loss, right? I think the fallout would be greater in Columbus. But in terms of being more devastating, I think it'd be much worse for Oregon. Maybe I'm splitting hairs there.
I look at the way you frame that, and I think there's a lot of validity to that. Because yes, ultimately, I agree. I think that, look, if Oregon loses in the playoff, regardless of round, if Oregon loses in the playoff, they're not running people out the building.
Right.
And the trajectory is still there, recruiting class is still there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If Ohio State loses at any point, but most especially if they lose to Oregon in the Rose Bowl, the masses are already assembled. Again, they've already got the successor picked out. If you from the masses, I don't know if Ross Bjork has the successor picked out, but the Ohio State fan base certainly does. So that aspect of things is just plain different. Some of that comes from quote unquote expectation, but some of that comes from just outlandish expectation. To say nothing of, hey, by the way, like all these guys, especially on the coaching side, and now the players themselves, hey, this is big business. People get paid a lot of money to win football games, and the stakes are high regardless. So to a certain degree, you sign up for some of this, but yeah, on that side, when you don't want to be mentioned in the same sentence as John Cooper very often if you're the Ohio State head coach, and Ryan Day has surpassed him in so many ways to that fan base. So yeah, as I say, there is a fringe who would look at a championship as hollow because it's a year that included a loss to Michigan. That's part of it. That's what they're dealing with over there. Here, to your point though, of would it be looked at as a bigger letdown? There's a lot of validity to that, because Oregon has spent the year validating itself in the Big Ten by winning, by beating Ohio State at home, by going on the road environments that it had to, by playing 8 conference games in 8 weeks when nobody else had to do that, by all those things, by overcoming a couple of short-term injuries that were to significant players.
Having another Heisman finalist.
All the sorts of things, for the first 2 weeks of the season was fire the OC, fire the O-line coach. By the end of the season, you have a Joe Moore finalist offensive line and a Heisman finalist quarterback.
We have not talked enough about that, by the way. We've not made a big enough deal about the fact that this season started with absolute, the offensive line was like the biggest disaster in college football to then being one of the most highly regarded units in the country, which is just, which is probably the textbook example of not overreacting to week 1 or week 2 happenings, but we're still going to do it. It's still going to be fun, but I don't
think there was much overreaction. I think there was
proper reactions.
I think it was reaction. Because if anyone would like to show for me another prime example, I don't care who the opponent is, of 11 lineup changes in a win, please show that to me. I will gladly review it accordingly. But I don't think 11 lineup changes to the offensive line in around 60 or so plays, if memory serves me right, I don't think that that's a formula for sustained success. Yeah. So I think that those are just reactions to what was going on. Be that as it may, yes, course correction in a big way, along with many other things over the course of the season. But bottom line, to your point regarding the stakes and how things would be viewed with a win or a loss, look, regardless, whoever wins this, they were supposed to do that. And the loss is either, as you put it, carnage, or just severe disappointment. And for this fan base in particular, look, I mean, you saw it and felt it at times in Vegas last year in the Pac-12 championship game. It was, should have beat them in the regular season, had them. All right, there were a couple of fourth down plays. This is the chance for that further validation. This is the chance, like, get into the field. And if you get there now, we're a live bullet. It's real. Like, we're as realistic a contender as anybody if we could just get in this thing. And to be back and forth and to have a fourth quarter lead, but to still lose it again became the just annual feeling of like, this team is finally ready to contend for and compete for that elusive championship and to finally break through and get there. And it's stripped away again. And if it happens again here, when you're number one and you've won the league and you've done all those things, look, there'll be minimum disappointment. As you say, the manner in which it would occur, I think would definitely spell into and fill in the gaps of the national perspective as to exactly how big a disappointment it would be.
Because the questions that Oregon will always continue to face is whether or not they can actually win the big one, because it hasn't happened. And it's not particularly valid. It's not particularly interesting even, but that is kind of the knock on any school that's kind of considered an upstart. You can't do it until you've done it. And I think Oregon would very much, I mean, obviously for obvious reasons, would like to get that, particular stigma wiped away. And there's one way to do it.
Absolutely. And to that note, a bonus 2 minutes here for folks. We'll provide them a little bit of a Christmas present. So while you're around extended family who maybe you want a little bit of an escape from here around the holiday season, we'll give you these extra couple minutes. Should that day come, whether it be now or at any point in the future, there are already those suggesting and weighing in, Bill, as you know, about the merits of built, not bought, and that now they're already setting the groundwork for, if it's a bought championship, that somehow tarnishes or takes away from, as if nobody else has been buying and paying for.
I would love to know who could possibly win this national championship who would not fall under the umbrella of bought.
I was going to say, even Boise State. Boise State. Did Ashton Jeanty stay out of the goodness of his heart, no matter how much he says he loves that school? And he does. And he clearly does. Absolutely. I'm not taking anything away from that. He did it for free.
But he's not playing for a meal card.
I was going to say, you think he did it for just the rental truck? That's it? Come on. I mean,
listen, and I'm all in on the conversation around paying players and like the way that the sport has changed. Like, it is, there's a lot going on. There's a lot to adjust to. But if you don't like the high dollar NIL, get to Dallas a few days early for the Cotton Bowl if the Ducks are there, and go to the FCS championship game between North Dakota State and Montana State in Frisco. And you can go get your wholesome NIL is only $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 fix there, and then you can go watch the high dollar players play a couple days later.
We already know why Bill wants to go to Dallas. That's laid out accordingly.
So I can root against Montana State. Boo.
But no, that conversation, and as I say, the relative merits about and the yearning for, I don't know, some virtue of a different world and a different era. Which, by the way, that world and era
never existed.
Never existed.
Yeah.
Ever. Again, would you like to line up? We can go back. It's okay. You don't have to go back in history. You don't go back to the Pony Express and all that. No. Mm-hmm. Would you like to go back and take a look at how many players in certain SEC teams, how many parents had no-show jobs at doctors and lawyers' offices over the last 20 years? Mm-hmm. Believe me, we can do that. We can come up with that. That's no problem. People want to get into built, not bought. Oh, it was all through high school recruiting. Oh, yeah, you're right. Yes, absolutely. Before the portal era, all that stuff. Yeah, none of those teams, nobody had any kind of sweetheart deals of any kind. Never existed. No.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? So if you weren't playing that game, well, there's a reason why you weren't in the field then, weren't you?
You weren't playing in the big game. Yeah. If
you want to sit at the big kid table, this is what it takes.
You got to order off the grown-up menu.
Mm-hmm. This is not a chicken nuggets situation. This is fine steak from here on. You got to eat what you kill. It requires breaking eggs to eat this omelet. Like this is not.
Keep going. How many of these you got?
Every metaphor. Yeah. This is. You're not growing. You're not only growing your own food here. It does require a little bit more than gardening to get there at the end of this journey in modern college football. And I would argue, modern college football has been there before the portal, before one-time transfer, before NIL was NIL, or any which other thing. I think some people are opening their eyes to that reality a little bit sooner or later than others. But this is the system.
If anyone does try to discredit an Oregon championship, if that comes because of the manner the roster was built, there's a lot of intellectually dishonest conversations around sports. Like that's kind of a whole cottage industry around sports, but that would be up there among the most egregious, simply because everybody's playing this game, and not only are they playing this game, it's within the framework of the rules. So it is a level playing field. It is a level playing field in that everybody in this current year and era has the ability to go spend on players as much as you want, as much as you can. Mm-hmm. So that is the level playing field. James, let's get out of here and let people enjoy their eggnog.
Agreed. And again, appreciate Bill for joining me here on this Monday edition of the Ducks Confidential podcast. Reminder to like, subscribe, 5-star review, all that stuff. So that way it helps the show build, helps other people see it, and it will automatically populate in your podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure to send questions in to our colleague, Ryan Clark. I'm sure he'll have mailbags, if not before the Rose Bowl, after that, regardless of outcome and the like. And, of course, a reminder to check out all of the fine coverage leading up to and through the Rose Bowl and all the college football playoff from myself, from Bill, from Ryan, from Joe Freeman, and a cast far greater than that. As the Ducks go on this postseason run, we will have lots on a day-to-day basis. But yes, enjoy your holidays here the next few days, and our colleagues will be joining you in other editions of the podcast in the days ahead.